My true story from Nevada. My DIL said, "It's just a gag gift," after giving me a dog collar on my birthday, so I gave them the mortgage bill and walked out. They wanted a laugh. I gave them the lesson of a lifetime. This is our party. You are just a guest. And honestly, you did not pay a cent for this birthday cake. That was what my daughter-in-law said to me right as the guests were singing happy birthday. Her voice had that saccharine edge, the kind that smiled at you while slicing your ribs open. My son stood next to her, not saying a word, holding our youngest granddaughter, who clapped her hands like she understood the weight of the moment. I stood there in front of everyone, feeling like a misplaced ornament at a celebration that was no longer mine. The table was long and narrow, dressed in a cheap plastic tablecloth that was already curling at the edges. There were balloons, yes, but not in my favorite colors. No lavender, no rose, just a mismatched scatter of yellow and blue, probably left over from the last baby shower. They had set the buffet on the kitchen counter. Store-bought cupcakes, a sheet cake that read Happy B-Day Grandma with half the frosting smeared from someone's elbow, and a crock pot of lukewarm chili. I did not recognize half the people in the room. Friends of my daughter-in-law, co-workers maybe, a neighbor or two. Not one face from my church group, not one call from my oldest friend Marlene in Texas. I doubt they even invited her. I stood by the corner of the living room, hands folded in front of me like a child in timeout. My back ached. My legs were tired. I had spent the morning vacuuming and the afternoon ironing my blouse, because I knew nobody else would. But I had held onto a tiny thread of hope. Maybe, I thought, this would be the year they remembered me, not just as the woman who wipes the counters and picks up the kids from daycare, but as the one who made this house possible, as the one who gave up everything in Texas to come here, to this life, where I am useful but invisible. Then came the gift. My daughter-in-law reached under the table and pulled out a small box wrapped in shiny red paper. Her nails, perfectly manicured, tapped against it like she was handing me something precious. I looked up at her, searching her face for any flicker of warmth. There was none. Just that smile that said this moment was more for them than for me. "Here, Grandma," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "We got you something special." Everyone leaned in. My grandson, who had just turned 11, laughed before I even opened the box, like he had already been told what was inside. I peeled back the wrapping slowly, already sensing something was wrong. Inside the box was an orange dog collar, neon bright, with a silver tag that read in bold capital letters, "Bite Me." For a second, I could not breathe. There was a pause in the room, a silence so thin it might have cracked in two. And then, laughter. Loud, sharp, cruel. My granddaughter shrieked with delight. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, that is hilarious!" My son smiled, but it was tight and uncomfortable, like he was trying not to make eye contact with me. "It's just a gag gift," my daughter-in-law said, waving her hand as if that explained everything. "Lighten up, Mom. You always take things so seriously." I held the collar in my hands. The leather was stiff, new, and it smelled of rubber and mockery. I ran my thumb over the words, "Bite Me," and tried to imagine who had thought this was funny, who had spent money on this, wrapped it, and decided it was the right thing to give the woman who watched their kids, who cooked their meals, who cleaned up the messes they pretended not to see. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask why, but no words came. My throat tightened, my cheeks flushed, not with anger, but with humiliation so deep I thought I might collapse. I looked at my granddaughter, who was still giggling, and wondered what she would remember of this moment when she grew up. Would she think it was funny? Would she tell the story one day, not realizing the woman holding the collar had once tucked her in at night, singing softly so her bad dreams would go away? No one came to my defense. Not one person. I placed the collar back in the box, folded the lid shut, and smiled the way women smile when they are trying not to cry. "Thank you," I said softly. That was very thoughtful. My daughter-in-law seemed satisfied with herself. She turned back to the guests, clapping her hands, asking if anyone wanted more chili. The music picked up again, something poppy and loud. My son disappeared into the hallway. And I? I took the box with me and walked into the kitchen. There I did what I always do. I started cleaning. The dishes were stacked high from the buffet, plastic forks and paper plates, napkins soaked with spilled soda. I rolled up my sleeves and began washing them, one by one because no one else would. The water was too hot, and my fingers turned red, but I needed something to keep my hands busy. If I kept still, I would feel it all. The sting, the shame, the growing hollowness in my chest. From the kitchen window, I could see the backyard. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. I remembered when we planted that tree, my son and I. He was 9. We laughed when the roots got tangled, and I taught him how to hold the trunk steady. Now that same boy had let his wife hand me a dog collar for my birthday, and he had said nothing. I rinsed the last plate and dried my hands. My back aches worse now, and my knees tremble. I looked around the kitchen. Every corner was clean, because I had kept it that way. The home they called theirs was built on my hands, my savings, my sacrifices. And yet I was the guest, the extra, the joke. In the living room, they laughed without me. I heard someone open a beer. Someone else shouted over the music. I did not return to the party. I stayed in the kitchen, sitting on a stool by the pantry, staring at that orange collar sitting on top of the garbage bin. I did not cry. I could not. I was too far beyond tears. What I felt was something colder, something quieter, not rage, but clarity. They wanted a laugh. I would give them a lesson. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Before Nevada, there was Texas. A quiet corner of it, just outside San Angelo, where I had a little brick house with a creaky porch swing and a wild lavender bush that refused to die. I knew my neighbors by name. I had a pew in the 3rd row at Mount Olive Baptist, where I volunteered every Tuesday folding bulletins. Every Sunday, after service, we'd gather for potluck and gossip in whispers over deviled eggs. I had a life. Simple, but mine. When my husband died, I held on for as long as I could. I kept the porch clean. I kept the radio playing. But it gets lonely, you know, eating soup alone at a table meant for 2. Then one night, my son called. "Mom," he said, "why don't you come stay with us for a while, just until you feel better? The kids would love to see more of you." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I sold the house within the month. I told myself it would be temporary, just a season. A pause. The plan was never to stay for good, but one thing folds into another, and before I knew it, I was putting down roots in a place that never truly welcomed me. They had just bought a new house, bigger, better school district, more bedrooms. My son mentioned they were worried about the mortgage, so I offered. I said, "Let me help. I do not need much, and it will ease your burden." He said thank you, but his eyes looked past me when he did. I started sending payments directly to the bank, quietly, every month. My son gave me the login once, and I never bothered him about it again. I just did it. Because I could. Because they were my family. Nobody asked how the money came. They never wondered why my clothes got older, or why I never went out for lunch with the other ladies in the neighborhood. They never saw the envelope I tore open each month, the one with the last of my savings from my husband's life insurance. I never asked to be added to the deed. I did not want ownership. I just wanted to be needed. And for a while I was. Sort of. At first they seemed grateful. My daughter-in-law would say things like, "It's nice having another adult in the house," or "The kids really love having you around." But over time, the tone changed. It went from gratitude to assumption. From assumption to entitlement. It started small. They stopped saying thank you. Then they stopped asking if I was tired. Then one day, my granddaughter spilled milk on the rug, and my daughter-in-law shouted from the kitchen, "Can you clean that up? You're already down there." Down there. Like I was part of the furniture. They put me in the basement. Not unfinished, just cold. The window was tiny, facing the fence. No sunlight came through. I slept on a twin mattress pushed against a cement wall, with boxes of Christmas decorations stacked beside me. My room smelled like mildew and old pine, but it was better than feeling in the way upstairs. I did the laundry, all of it. I folded their clothes, including underthings I never should have touched. I packed lunches. I picked up the kids from soccer practice. I vacuumed. I watched the dog when they traveled. And I cooked dinner 5 nights a week. Roast on Sundays, lasagna on Wednesdays. No one ever told me it was good. They just ate it, left their plates, and disappeared into their phones. And what did I have? I had no pension. I left my job early years ago to care for my husband's mother when she got sick. That meant no Social Security benefits, no retirement savings beyond what we'd managed to put away in that Texas house. and now that house was gone. The check had gone straight into the new home, into their home. They never once asked if I missed it. They never asked if I was okay. Once I tried to mention it. I said, gently, I used to have a garden back in Texas. I miss getting dirt on my hands. My daughter-in-law looked up from her tablet and said, well, the HOA here doesn't allow planting. Anyway, the yard's for the kids. That was the end of that. And still I stayed. Because when you are a mother, especially an old one, you convince yourself that sacrifice is part of the role, that invisibility is the price of relevance. I told myself I was being useful, that I had purpose. But then came my birthday, the party where they told me I was a guest, where they gave me a dog collar and laughed like I was a clown at my own funeral. Later that evening, I overheard my son and daughter-in-law talking in the hallway. I was in the laundry room folding towels. She said, she's being dramatic. It was a joke. And he, my own flesh and blood, he said, yeah, Mom's just getting sensitive. She's old now. Everything hurts her feelings. Everything hurts her feelings. That was the moment something in me shifted. I did not expect him to defend me like a knight, but I hoped for something, one word, one gesture, a pause. But he gave me nothing. He let her reduce me to a stereotype, the bitter old woman who cannot take a joke. And he agreed. All I had given, all I had carried, and now I was just Mom, old, sensitive, an accessory in the house I helped build. That was the night I realized I was not staying with family, I was surviving among strangers. That night, I did not sleep. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the dishwasher and the occasional thud of someone upstairs, probably the dog knocking something over. I sat in the basement, on the edge of my narrow bed, holding the dog collar in my lap. It was still in the box, the lid slightly ajar. The orange strap caught the light from the hallway like a warning sign, bright, loud, impossible to ignore. I stared at it for a long time. Was I overreacting? Was it really just a joke, as they said? Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I had become too fragile, too soft, too bitter. That is the word the young ones use now, isn't it? Bitter, like all the women who gave their lives to others and forgot how to laugh at being mocked. But deep down, I knew it was not about the collar. It was about what it represented. It was about years of being treated like furniture in a house I helped build, about being called a guest in a home where I scrubbed the toilets, about hearing my son say, she's old now. Everything hurts her feelings. That collar was not a joke. It was the mask that made the truth visible. I reached for the small tin box I kept in the closet behind my sweaters, the one with important papers, the things they never bothered to ask about. My name was still on the mortgage account. When I first offered to help them pay for the house, my son had added me out of necessity. He needed the credit. After a while, I just kept making the payments. Quietly, consistently. There it was. 3 payments left. 3. I held the latest mortgage statement in my hand. The total was circled, just like I always did, my little ritual before paying. But tonight I did not log into the website. I did not pull out my checkbook. I just stared at that number. What if I did not pay? What if I stopped now? They thought the house was paid off. I never corrected them. They assumed because the last time the bank called I had taken care of it like always. My son even joked once that he finally owned the damn place free and clear, and I just smiled. Let him believe what he wanted. Let them all believe. I folded the statement, slowly, carefully. Then I walked upstairs, barefoot and quiet. The lights were off, but the party remnants were still everywhere. Half-empty cups, bits of confetti, greasy napkins. The house smelled like chili and candle wax. The living room was a mess and nobody thought to clean it. Nobody ever did except me. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the small light above the stove. The dog lay curled under the table, tail twitching in sleep. I stepped over him and found the drawer where they kept the printer paper. I took out a single sheet. Then I sat at the dining table, the same one where my daughter-in-law had placed the collar, and wrote. In my best cursive, I wrote, "Happy late birthday." Then underneath that, "This is the gift I am returning. Please read it carefully before throwing it away." I folded the mortgage statement and slipped it into the envelope. I sealed it, pressed it flat, and wrote their names across the front. It was a strange thing how steady my hands felt. There was no tremor, no hesitation, just calm, not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting to be loved properly, when you stop making excuses for people who never deserved your sacrifices. I looked around the kitchen. It was clean, of course. I had scrubbed it before dinner. The floor still gleamed from the vinegar I used that morning. I thought about how many years I had spent maintaining this illusion of home, of harmony, of being okay. I thought about every toilet I scrubbed while they slept, every diaper I changed, every night I stayed up with a sick grandchild while their parents went to dinner. And for what? So they could laugh at me, so they could say I was just a guest. I stood up and walked to the dining table, the same table where she had placed the box. I laid my envelope right there in the same exact spot, perfectly centered. The collar was still on the counter, where I had left it earlier. I picked it up, opened the lid again, and stared at the words one last time. Bite me. Well, maybe they would understand that better when the bank came knocking. I closed the box, tucked it under my arm, and went back downstairs. I could not sleep, so I sat by the small window in the basement, the one that barely let in any moonlight. I listened to the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow kind. The kind that tells you, with certainty, that nothing will change unless you do something. And I had finally made my decision. 3 payments. That was all I had left. 3 weeks, and this house would no longer be mine to protect. Let them handle it. Let them laugh now. Tomorrow I would begin packing, quietly, efficiently. I had places to go, plans to make, and they would not see me coming. I woke before the sun. The house was still asleep. No footsteps, no murmurs, just the slow exhale of silence. I moved carefully, each step deliberate. I had learned how to be quiet in this house, how to disappear. It was a skill I never thought I would need after raising a family, but it had become my way of life. Invisibility, after all, was its own kind of armor. I pulled out the old Navy duffel from under the bed, the same one I used years ago when my husband and I took our last road trip to Oklahoma. The zipper stuck halfway, but I managed. I folded only what I needed: 2 sweaters, a few blouses, underthings, my Bible, and the tin box with my documents. I left behind the framed pictures, the hand-sewn quilt I had made for my granddaughter, the photo album they never looked through. I did not want to carry ghosts. I stood in the middle of the basement, taking one last look. The room was clean. Of course it was. I had scrubbed it top to bottom the week before, not knowing it would be my last time. The little window showed a sliver of sky beginning to brighten. It would be dawn soon. I wrote no note. There was nothing left to say. I stepped into the hallway, careful not to let the duffel thump against the wall. Up the stairs, past the kitchen. I paused at the dining table. The envelope with the mortgage statement was still there, right where I had left it the night before. I placed the dog collar on top of it, like a bow. Then I opened the front door and stepped out into the chill. The Nevada air was crisp, dry, and silent. The early morning held its breath, and so did I. I walked past the yard where we planted roses that never bloomed, past the mailbox that still bore my last name, even though no one used it, past the trash bins where I had tossed years of regret in the form of bills, reminders, and unanswered holiday cards. I kept walking. The bus stop was 8 blocks away. I could have called a cab, but I did not want anyone tracing anything, not even a receipt. So I walked. My knees ached after the 3rd block, but I pushed on. The sky turned from steel gray to pale peach. Birds began to chirp. A jogger passed me without a glance. It felt strange, being out in the world again, not as someone's grandmother or cook or cleaner, but just a woman, an old woman with a bag and a plan. I reached the bus stop just as the city bus pulled up. The driver barely looked at me. I liked that. I liked that he did not ask questions. I paid in cash, took a seat in the back, and watched the neighborhood fade behind me. An hour later, I arrived at the Sunrise Senior Center on the edge of town. It was a modest building with white siding and blue shutters, tucked between a quiet lake and a grove of cottonwoods. The front garden was already blooming with early spring flowers. It did not look like a facility. It looked like a home. I walked in, and the woman at the desk looked up. She wore glasses too big for her face and a smile that reached her eyes. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Eileen," I said. A few minutes later, Eileen came down the hall. Her hair was silver now, cut short and neat, but I recognized her immediately. We had met 35 years ago in church, back in Texas. She used to run the choir. Now she was here, volunteering at the center full-time. When I called her weeks ago and asked if she knew of a place where I could go quietly, she said, "I know just the place, and you do not owe me a story unless you want to tell it." She hugged me tighter than anyone had in years. "Your room's ready," she whispered. The room was small but bright, a twin bed with a soft blue cover, a nightstand, a little writing desk. But what took my breath away was the window. It overlooked the lake. Water shimmered beneath the early light, calm and glassy. Ducks paddled across it. The trees swayed gently, as if welcoming me home. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed. No one knew I was here. No one had followed. No one called. My phone was still in the basement drawer, powered off and forgotten. It was just me and the view, and it was enough. Later that morning, Eileen brought me a tray with tea and toast. She did not ask questions. She just placed the tray on the desk and sat beside me for a moment. We looked out the window together, saying nothing. Sometimes the best conversations are the ones without words. I spent the rest of the day unpacking, slowly. I hung my sweaters in the little closet, arranged my Bible and a photo of my husband on the nightstand. I opened the window, letting in the scent of the lake and pine. It smelled like freedom. For the first time in 10 years, I did not have a to-do list. No diapers to change, no dishes to scrub, no school pickups, no passive-aggressive comments to ignore, no duties assigned by people who never truly saw me. It felt strange at first, this stillness, but it did not take long for the stillness to become peace. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind moved the curtains gently, like a hand brushing hair from a forehead. I fell asleep without worry. No voices above me, no footsteps waking me, no laughter at my expense, just the quiet breath of a new beginning. And when I woke the next morning, I realized something simple but profound. I was not running away. I was finally walking toward myself. They found the envelope the next morning. It was my daughter-in-law who opened it first. I could picture her perfectly, still in her robe, hair half-tied, coffee in hand, annoyed at the mess still left over from the parties she never cleaned. She probably rolled her eyes when she saw the words "Happy Late Birthday" scrawled across the front. I imagine she laughed when she read the first line of the note, thinking it was some kind of delayed joke. But by the time she pulled out the mortgage statement and saw the past due notice, her face would have dropped. She screamed. The kids were still eating cereal. My son came rushing in, half-shaven, towel over his shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked, panic rising. She shoved the paper at him. "Did you know the mortgage is past due?" He blinked. "What?" "No, the house is paid off." She pointed to the balance. "Apparently not. Apparently your mother's been lying to us." He flipped through the pages. His lips moved as he read, eyes growing wider. Then he stormed into the hallway, phone already in hand. He called the bank. I know because I used to hear him on the phone all the time. He has a specific voice when he talks to people he thinks are beneath him. 15 minutes later, he hung up and punched the wall. They told him the truth. 3 payments remained. 3 final payments on a mortgage he thought had been paid in full a year ago. And because none had been made in months, the account had been flagged. He had 15 days before the house would enter pre-foreclosure proceedings. He could not believe it. He had walked around for months, bragging about being a homeowner, telling his friends how he and his wife made it, how the house was theirs, how they worked hard for it. But the bank did not care about his pride. The bank only cared about payments. From what I was told later, through a neighbor who still went to my old church, they went into full-blown crisis mode. My daughter-in-law was calling her parents, asking for help. They tried to sell off the second car, the flat screen in the living room, even some jewelry she never wore. My son started skipping work, pacing the house like a caged animal. And then they tried to call me. I had left my phone behind, buried in the basement nightstand drawer, next to the old church programs and birthday cards nobody ever opened. I had deleted every cloud login, every backup. They had no number, no address, just a sudden gaping hole in their world where I used to be. She left messages, I am sure, probably started polite. "Mom, we need to talk. Something came up." Then desperate. "Where are you? Please call back. It is important." And finally, angry. "This is not funny. You need to fix this. You owe us." But the phone never rang. Not for them. At dinner, my granddaughter pushed her plate away. "Where's Grandma?" Neither of them could answer. "She's just gone," my son finally said. "Did she die?" the little one asked, eyes wide. "No," my daughter-in-law snapped. "She's being dramatic. She'll come back." But I did not, and for the first time they felt it. Not just my absence, but the power I held. The mortgage was still in my name. The payments had always come from my account. I had kept that roof over their heads, and they had never once considered what might happen if I stopped. They thought I would always be there. They thought wrong. My son called the bank again the next day, tried to plead, to bargain, to buy time. But the math was simple. Without me, they could not make the payment. And the bank? The bank was just a machine. Cold, indifferent. 15 days, that was all they had. They called everyone, friends, extended family, people they had not spoken to in years. My daughter-in-law even tried to crowdfund on Facebook, spinning a story about sudden financial hardship. But no one bit. Maybe they sensed the truth behind the pixels. Maybe karma was quicker than expected. I imagine the mood in that house changed fast. No more joking, no more laughter in the kitchen, just tension thick in the air. My son and his wife, once so smug in their comfort, now reduced to panicked whispers and slammed doors. And the kids, innocent and confused, watched it all happen. "Why did Grandma leave?" my grandson must have asked. And what could they say? Could they admit that the woman they mocked held the entire foundation of their lives in her hands? Could they explain that their guest was actually the architect? Doubtful. But the silence would answer for them, and deep down, they knew. They had no control. No number to call, no key to twist this back into place, no power over me anymore. His name was Gerald Wilkins, and I had not seen him in over 20 years. We used to serve together on the finance committee at Mount Olive Baptist back in Texas. He was a quiet man with thick glasses and a habit of scribbling on napkins during budget meetings. After his wife passed, he moved to Las Vegas and set up a small legal practice focused on elder affairs and estate transitions. When I reached out to him through Eileen at the senior center, he remembered me immediately. "Miss Margaret?" he said, his voice full of that old Sunday kindness. "Took you long enough to call?" I met him 2 days after I left the house. We sat across from each other at a modest wooden desk in his quiet office. The blinds were drawn halfway, and a fan clicked softly in the corner. I had brought every document, mortgage records, bank statements, the original deed, copies of my ID, even a handwritten list of what I wanted done. He read everything carefully, then looked up at me. "You sure about this?" I nodded. He took off his glasses, folded them slowly, and said, "All right then, let us make it official." First, we drafted a legal notice of revocation, removing my son's name from all remaining documentation that might link him to the property. Since the house had always been legally mine, with his name never added to the deed after that first credit application, it was a clean process. No contest, no complications. Then we arranged the sale. I asked Gerald to handle it quietly. I did not want the house to end up in the hands of another real estate shark looking to flip it for profit. I wanted it to mean something. So, we contacted a local nonprofit that provided transitional housing for low-income seniors, especially women like me, women who had given everything and had nowhere to go. They were overjoyed to accept the property. I made only one request, signed and notarized, that the house could never be rented, sold, or otherwise transferred to any relative of mine, directly or indirectly, ever. Gerald raised his eyebrows at that clause. I simply said, some things need to stay buried. The sale moved fast. Within a week, the papers were signed. The house was no longer mine. It was not theirs either. It now belonged to people who needed it more than anyone in that house ever had. The money was more than I expected. Even with the final 3 payments deducted, the equity in the home added up nicely. Real estate in Nevada had appreciated more than I thought. Gerald asked what I wanted to do with the proceeds. "I want to divide it into 3 parts," I told him. First, we set up a fund for elderly women at risk of homelessness, managed by the same nonprofit that now owned the house. I named it the Quiet Hands Fund, because that is what women like me have, quiet hands that carry generations without recognition. Second, I established a small scholarship in my husband's name for students pursuing nursing, preferably those caring for family while studying. My husband had wanted to be a doctor, but he never had the chance. This way, he could still heal in some small way. The third part, Gerald helped me invest carefully, enough to cover my rent at the senior center, my food, medical needs, and a little travel if I ever wanted to see something new before my time came. I was not rich, but I was free. And freedom, after a life of service, feels like wealth. Gerald handled everything with grace and speed. On the last day, he slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside was a formal letter addressed to my son and his wife on legal letterhead. He let me read it before he mailed it. It was short, just 2 sentences. Effective immediately, the property located at 742 Golden Elm Way is no longer under your mother's ownership. The individual responsible for the mortgage has withdrawn from your lives permanently. I stared at the words. No emotion, no explanation, just fact. It was perfect. Gerald looked at me and asked, "Do you want to sign it with a personal note?" I shook my head. "No. They've already received my message." He nodded once and sealed the envelope. As he walked me to the door, he said, "Most people come in here trying to hold on to something. You're the first I've met who came to let go." I smiled. And for the first time in years, I meant it. It was 32 days after I walked out the front door when they were officially told to leave. The letter came from the nonprofit's legal department, formal and cold. It stated that the property was now under new ownership and that they were occupying it unlawfully. They had 15 days to vacate. No exceptions, no extensions. I imagine the moment the letter arrived, the envelope torn open over the breakfast table, cereal bowls half full, a quiet panic spreading like smoke. My son, face flushed. My daughter-in-law, hands trembling not from fear but fury. They must have called everyone again, family, friends, maybe even a lawyer, but it was final. The papers had been signed, the deal was done, the house was gone. To mark the moment, I sent them a package. Nothing extravagant, just a small square box wrapped in brown paper, postmarked from a city they had never heard of. No return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was the orange dog collar, the same one they had given me for my birthday, the one that said, "Bite me," in bold metallic letters, untouched, unworn, unforgotten. Beneath it was a handwritten card, just a little joke, but I suppose this time, I'm the one laughing last. That was it. No signature, no explanation, no plea. I did not need one. The day the box arrived, I was sitting by the lake outside my window, sipping tea. The sky was a gentle gray, the water soft with ripples. I did not think of them often anymore, but that day I allowed myself one indulgence, to imagine their faces. My daughter-in-law opening the lid, expecting perhaps an apology or explanation, and finding instead the symbol of her own cruelty, returned with quiet precision. I pictured her face twisting, her hands tightening, her voice rising. She threw the collar against the wall. It clattered to the floor. My son said nothing. He sat at the kitchen table with the card in his hands, reading it again and again, as if it might suddenly change. His shoulders slumped. He looked down at the floor, not in rage but in realization. And then came the question. "Daddy?" It was the youngest, my granddaughter, just 6 years old. "What did you and Mommy do to make Grandma leave?" Silence. He could not answer. Because there was no single moment, no mistake. It was the years, the accumulation of disregard, of mockery, of entitlement. It was every dish I washed without thanks, every time they laughed at me instead of with me, every night I stayed up so they could sleep. They would not be able to explain that to a child. Because children still believe that love earns love, that kindness matters, that family is forever. They would learn, in time, that love given freely is not love owed endlessly. They packed up the house in bitter silence. My daughter-in-law called her parents again, but they would not take them in. My son tried to find a rental, but the deposit was more than they could manage without my quiet payments covering the gaps. The life they had built, on the back of my sacrifice, was now crumbling brick by brick. And me? I did not celebrate. I simply exhaled. Some people think revenge must be loud, explosive, a storm, but I know better. The deepest revenge is silence. It is the absence they never expected, the quiet where your name used to be, the echo of your laughter missing from the house they thought was theirs. It is the moment they realize you were the foundation all along, and now that foundation is gone. My room is small, but it fits me just right. The bed is firm and faces the window, where every morning the sun drips gold over the lake like honey on warm bread. A pine tree leans just enough to cast a dancing shadow across my wall, and the ducks gather like clockwork just after dawn, waiting for someone to toss them crumbs. I never do. Eileen says we are not supposed to feed them, but I always smile when I see them. They remind me of freedom, of drifting, of not needing permission to belong. Each morning I boil water in a little kettle they gave me when I moved in. I brew my tea slowly. Chamomile if my thoughts are restless, mint when I want to feel sharp. I sit by the window with my journal, a pen, and sometimes a book from the small library downstairs. The other residents call it the quiet corner. But it is never quiet inside my head. There are memories there, thoughts, but now, for once, they are mine alone. There is no screaming here, no slammed doors, no glances that cut, no laughter that bites. Just gentle footsteps, the occasional radio hum from the hallway, and the steady rhythm of my breath, finally moving at its own pace. Some of the women here know bits of my story. They asked, in gentle tones, where I came from. I told them without bitterness that I left a house that never felt like home. I said I chose peace over obligation, that I walked away, not out of anger, but clarity. They call me the woman who walked. There is a kind of reverence in the way they say it, as if I did something brave. I do not see it that way. I think I simply remembered, too late but just in time, that I still had a self-worth protecting. There is one woman, Doris, who was left by her children at a bus station. Another named Lupe, who gave up her house for her son's business and now knit scarves in silence. We sit together sometimes, not to talk, but to share space, to breathe the same air of relief. We do not speak of revenge. We speak of rediscovery. I have no television in my room, no phone. I asked them not to give my number to anyone, and they respected that. Eileen brings my mail once a week. It is mostly newsletters, a catalog or two, and the occasional card from old friends in Texas. No letters from the family I left behind. I do not expect any. But if one were to come, I am not sure I would open it. Not out of spite of peace. I do not need to know what they feel now. I do not need to revisit the house that forgot me until I removed myself from its walls. I imagine they have moved on, or are trying to. I wish them no harm. I simply wish them distance. Each week, I write a page in my journal, just one. I do not fill it with lists or regrets. I write down one thing I saw that was beautiful, one thing I felt that was mine, one truth I want to remember. Today I wrote, "The sun warmed my face through the glass. The ducks argued, then drifted apart. I sipped mint tea and did not think of anything at all. It was the best moment of my life." I no longer measure time by obligations, not by school pickups, grocery runs, or the hum of dishwashers. I measure it by light, by silence, by the space I finally claimed. This is not a grand life, but it is mine. And as I close this chapter of my journal, I write the words that have been waiting in my chest for years, words I never dared say out loud, until now. I do not need to laugh with them. I only need to live without swallowing tears every time they laughed at me. That, to me, is freedom. And I earned it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stirred something in you, if you've ever been overlooked, disrespected, or silenced by the very people you gave everything to, know this: you are not alone. Sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one holding the truth. And sometimes, walking away is not weakness. It is wisdom. If you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, if you believe silence can be power, then subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Here, we remember the women they tried to forget, because revenge has no expiration date. And when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens. Click that subscribe button and join me for the next true story. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop remembering who you are.